Right.
Yeah, they have 4 kids.
Would you like a mic?
How many people are we expecting on this Facebook Live?
This room has
I think in this room we'll be
incredible
fine.
acoustics. But if you like one,
No viewers yet.
Want me to tune in?
Yes, please. Get people once they see someone, they'll be more inclined.
yes. So, I mean,
Oh, actually, I can tune in on my phone to see what's happening.
I want them to have.
You don't need it. I'm fine. That's
Yeah, they're all working. So I can at least make it to you guys.
Oh my god, this is crazy.
right.
Is there people tuning in?
They could probably
Oh, you're
hear us
watching
talking.
it.
Hello? Hello?
Wait, let me say something. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can
No,
you-
that's startling me.
Can you hear me now? Like, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Like, I don't want to just talk loud.
She's trying.
Oh yeah, might be on delay.
You told me to speak louder, but then you're going to be able to hear me from over there.
It's a, well, yeah.
I can't hear. I'm confused.
Oh no.
Now it's a word.
You're gonna have to type in subtitles.
No.
Comment every favorite on the live stream. It's just your face keeps popping in and typing.
Wait, does it show that I've tuned in?
Yes.
Wait,
Oh yeah,
you can hear
Oh,
us.
fantastic.
Oh, it's like on a delay.
Wait, yours is delayed.
It's delayed, yeah.
Well, as long as you
That's
can hear
okay.
it.
Hey, the people who are tuning in can see that stupid.
Alright, we have to be silent.
So far, only Joseph's joined. Yes. We're live.
I just need this. So we have. We need space in one period.
All right, we are going to go ahead and get started with our debate. My name is Jackson Samples. I am the president of the University Democrats, and I want to thank you all for coming to this debate between 57th District House of Delegates and candidates Sally Hudson and Kathy Galvin. UDEMS would like to sincerely thank the candidates for attending this debate and agreeing to participate. We're very glad that UVA students will have an in-person opportunity to hear about your respective platforms and have us be able to make better informed decisions on election day. We'd also like to thank our moderator for joining us this evening, Dr. Paul Friedman, who is an assistant professor and associate chair of the Department of Politics here at UVA. Professor Friedman teaches courses in a wide variety of areas, including public opinion, mass media and politics, voting behavior, research methods, and the politics of food. And before I pass it off to Professor Friedman for the debate, I'd just like to give a quick bump on logistics for absentee voting this election day. So unfortunately, UVA students will likely be gone for election day because it is happening June 11th. So we'd like to make the advisory out there to students that you should vote absentee. You have 2 options for that. You can vote absentee in person, and that starts this Friday, April 26th. That's very easy. You go right ahead and go to your respective registrar's office and can vote right then and there. Or you can vote absentee by mail, which entails sending in an application, receiving the absentee ballot, and sending that in. Given the logistics there and the moving parts, we recommend that you go ahead and vote absentee in person. So again, that starts Friday, April 26th, and we encourage you to participate to make your voice heard in that election. So there's sort of my bump for voting in the primary, and with that, I'll pass it off to Professor Reed.
Terrific, Jackson. Thanks very much. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank our candidates for joining us. I want to thank UDEMS for sponsoring this event less than a week after the excitement of Beto O'Rourke in this very room. But it's important, I think, as a reminder that what happens in Richmond is at least as important as what happens in Washington when it comes to the issues that affect all of our lives. And so I'm excited to hear the candidates answer the questions that we have for them tonight. Let me be clear, by we, I mean the UDEMS with help from the community. All of the questions that I read tonight will be verbatim and in order as provided to me by the University Democrats who assembled these questions in part with input from the community via an online form that was made available. So these are not my questions, these are your questions, these are the UDEM's questions. Let me explain very quickly how what the rules are. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. We will go in order. That order has been determined by a coin toss. In fact, 2 coin tosses were held. Before we begin with the questions, we will have 3-minute opening statements, first by Kathy Galvin, then by Sally Hudson. The opening statements will be followed by the questions. The exception to the 90-second rule is that if one of the candidates says something specific about the other candidate in her response, if that something is negative and specific, that other candidate will have 30 seconds to respond. We have a timekeeper in the front row. Both candidates and I will be able to see the number of seconds remaining. At the close of the question session, there will be 2 minutes for closing statements, and we will wrap things up right around 7:30. So, without further ado, we will hear opening statements, 3 minutes each, first from Kathy Galvin, then from Sally Hudson.
Thank you very much. And good evening, everyone. Just about 45 minutes ago, I was in the emergency room at UVA hospital recovering from a bike accident. So it is something, I practice what I preach, but every so often there's a kind of occupational hazard. My name's Kathy Galvin. I'm running for the 57th District House of Delegates, and I am very happy to be here tonight. I believe that there are really 2 fundamental issues facing our Commonwealth and in the country in general. And it has to revolve around global climate change and also structural inequity. And in truth, I have been dealing with those issues for most of my life, not just as an adult, but as a child growing up in Brockton, Massachusetts, where my father was in fact a boxer. And I feel like I'm channeling him tonight. So Dad, help me out. I will say that when you're growing up in a working class town like I did, it's very real what are the consequences of failing in upward mobility. And in my case, what I saw was the implosion of the shoe factories. It was an economic shift that left many of my neighbors, many of my relatives without jobs. It also gave me the insight as to what happens when we do unbridled suburban development, because that was one of the engines that undid Brockton, Massachusetts as I was a kid growing up. We had different shopping centers growing all over in 4 corners of the city, and I saw my main street fail. Those kinds of experiences have left an indelible mark on my mind, and I was inspired by the values of my parents, who were both New Deal Democrats, and they taught me that you've always got to think about the other, and you've always got to make sure that you answer the call to serve. That call to serve came to me when I was in Boston, Massachusetts. I managed assisted housing. I studied economics and geography at Boston University. And then when I became involved with Boston Housing Authority's redevelopment projects, I was exposed to architects and decided that's what I need to do. So I became inspired by the architects that were community driven. That's what brought me to Charlottesville, Virginia. And I will work diligently to make sure that my issues, your issues of sustainability, equity, and then a just and safe world are promoted through my experiences. And in listening to you, I will be able to then translate those experiences into policies. I've demonstrated that as a school board member, 4 years, where we collapsed classrooms, we led to the reconfiguration of the schools. I showed that as a city councilor, where we demonstrated that we were able to close achievement gaps by getting the parents working with the growing opportunity programs. Those are the kinds of actions I will promote, and those are the kinds of things that I've seen where their gaps are with our colleagues in Richmond. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much to all of you for coming. I know that we have finals nearing, and so it's a big sacrifice for y'all to be here tonight. So I so appreciate you making time for it. Thanks to Paul for moderating, to all of you Dems for putting this together. My name is Sally Hudson, and I'm running for delegate here in the 57th District because I believe we're at a critical juncture in Virginia's history. I'm a professor here at UVA. I think, as many of you know, I'm an economist. I teach econ and stats. in the Baton School. And I think that right now in Virginia, we need to do what Democrats do best, which is to lead with both our heads and our hearts. As an economist, I've developed a lot of the detailed skills that we know about how to address policies with concrete solutions. But I think it's also important that we put the full force of our values behind those solutions, values that are rooted deeply in the kinds of crises that we've been confronting right here in Charlottesville and in Central Virginia. In many ways, Charlottesville is at the epicenter of a lot of the challenges that the country is facing. We know right here in Charlottesville that racism is so much more than tiki torch rallies or hateful slurs. It's about the structural inequities that keep people of color from getting access to the same resources that we all deserve. And that if we understand that in our hearts, then the solutions that we supply with our heads require confronting problems like the shortage of affordable housing here in our city or the rising cost of college. We've lived through lots of other crises here, some of which may be a little bit less relevant to you here now as students, but are right there on the horizon for you. Things like the rising cost of healthcare. I know lots of you might be on student plans or still on your parents' plans, but when you graduate, you're going to be worried about paying for your doctor's visits. And here in Central Virginia, we lived through a healthcare crisis. We had the highest health insurance premium spikes in the country last year. Had families paying $3,000 a month to cover two parents and two kids. And I don't know what kind of salaries you're planning on earning when you graduate, but that doesn't work for many families that I know. It's the kind of problem that we recognize is a moral crisis, but requires a pretty practical set of solutions. So those are the kinds of policies that I want to be advocating, the things that can solve those structural gaps between people that have housing, have education, have healthcare, confronting those moral crises with those detailed solutions. I think some of you here have had me in class, but those of you who haven't, I'm pretty tight on the nitty-gritty details, but I think now is a time that calls for moral leadership. I think here in this election in 2019 in Virginia, we have a really special opportunity to send strong champions to Richmond who will lead with both of those skill sets.
Thank you. Before we turn to the first question, I want to add one point, make sure that the audience knows, in addition to a timer, Joseph will be holding up a black notebook to signify to the speaker that there are 10 seconds remaining, and a red notebook to signify that time is up. Again, by virtue of the coin toss, it's been decided that Kathy Galvin will answer the first question first. From there, we will alternate, so Sally Hudson will answer the second question first, and so on. Here's the first question, and again, this is from, I'm reading verbatim from the questions provided by the students. Should you be elected, you would represent many of the same constituents State Senator Deeds does. One of Senator Deeds' signature issues is advocating for services for those with specific mental health needs. How would you support Senator Deeds' efforts and efforts in the House to provide better community mental health services?
Thank you. Well, I have great admiration for the work that Senator Deeds has done. He speaks from personal experience, the experience that he's had with his own son. I think what we've also seen is that there's a shortage of beds, and that's a fundamental problem with our mental health crisis. And we need to make sure that we have the resources in place so that our regional community health facilities like Region 10 are able to then meet the demands of the population as it grows. But right now, we don't have enough hospitals, we don't have enough clinics, and we don't have enough just overall response and is inadequate. So I think right now, taking a page from Senator Deeds, I would make sure that we are working hand in glove in the House of Delegates. At this point in time, I also think that we've got to go a step further with our mental health dockets. We've already approved that in Charleston City so that we are not criminalizing people with mental illness. And we also need to make sure that when we are dealing with any further expansion of Medicaid, then we are also making sure that we're providing resources to communities so that they can support their own clinics. One of the things I'm most proud of is that I worked with Holly Edwards to get a Central Virginia health clinic in Charlottesville City that was patterned after the Great Society programs that were in conjunction with Head Start. That got a sliding scale health clinic in Charlottesville, not dependent on anyone's income. We need to be moving in that direction.
Thank you. Sally Hudson.
So I think there are two key challenges that we have to tackle when it comes to mental health care. One is paying for the cost for folks who may not be able to pay for it for themselves, but the other is staffing the clinics. And staffing is not something that we talk about enough when we talk about expanding healthcare access. Because even if we make those services free in those publicly supported clinics, right now we don't have enough doctors and enough nurses and enough counselors to staff them. We're not training enough people like you to take those jobs because we're not paying the wages that they deserve to make them attractive relative to all of the many other things that you can do. So I think that one of the most important things that we can do to support Senator Deed's efforts in the state legislature is to also allocate funding for the kind of programs that would make those careers more attractive to young people. Partly that's about increasing the wages of those publicly supported positions, but it's also about early on investing in our community colleges and our public universities so that we can provide more of that training up front. We can build as many clinics as we want, but unless we put the healthcare providers in place as well and put folks like you on the track to do those jobs, then they'll ultimately be empty and understaffed when the patients get there.
Thank you. Second question, and this will go first to Sally Hudson. Multiple 2020 presidential candidates have now made single-payer healthcare a part of their policy platforms. In addition, policymakers in multiple states, such as California and New York, have made significant attempts towards implementing a single-payer system at the statewide level. Would you support a statewide single-payer system here in Virginia, and do you support a single-payer system more broadly speaking?
So I would love to see us get to single payer nationally. Here's what I think is the appropriate stopgap solution. Right now at the state level, right now a lot of states are reticent to invest in that kind of single payer overhaul because they think that DC is going to pull the rug out from under them in a few years when we do wholesale federal reform. So in the interim, we want to be thinking about practical solutions that can cover as many Virginians as possible while we're still sort of in limbo waiting for DC to act. I think that interim solution looks like what we call a Medicaid buy-in. It's like the public option that was floated in the original Affordable Care Act, but tailored to the state level. A Medicaid buy-in would allow any Virginian to buy into our Medicaid system. So you could purchase that publicly subsidized Medicaid plan from the state government, just like they were a private plan out on the marketplace. It's a really important part of stabilizing that health insurance premiums that I talked about earlier, because a public plan ensures that there's always a competitor to those private plans that have been jacking rates. The nice thing about Medicaid is that it's already in every zip code in Virginia. So we already know what it's like to roll that out at the state level. This is just a matter of giving people the opportunity to hop into that system. It's kind of like what Tim Kaine has proposed at the federal level with his Medicare X, but tailored to our state level while we're waiting for that more federal overhaul.
Thank you. Kathy Galvin.
One thing is very important at this point in time that we shore up the Affordable Care Act. It's extremely important that we make sure that we do provide access to good health care given the tools that we currently have. We're not at a point right now where Virginia is prepared to have a public option. We have to get to the point where we understand the cost of the public option as well. One of the first things I will do is, as your legislator in the House of Delegates, is to make sure that we put forward through JLARC, the Joint Audit Review Commission, to make sure that we have the resources we need and understanding we need of what the cost will be to get a single payer option in the exchanges. Now, right now, we've done a good job recently with having additional competition come into the exchanges. We got to do a better job of that. And by doing that, we will then drive prices down in terms of premiums within our current system. But again, I have to say that it's going to be very important that we produce a whole slew of options for people to have access to health care. It's going to be a long time before we get to the point where there is a single payer option throughout the country. It's going to be a long time before we get to the point where we can rely on any public health care that's totally and exclusively funded by the government. So I think at this point, partnerships with our employers is still very important to maintain, and we've got to expand competition in our exchanges.
Thank you. The third question goes to Kathy Galvin first. Here it is. Recent arrest data from the Charlottesville Police Department show that between 2014 and 2019, Black residents were nearly 5 times more likely to be arrested than any other race in the city. How should this problem be addressed? What can the state government do to hold local police forces accountable?
I think I can begin by saying that we need to do a much better job of reducing the disproportionate amount of incarceration of our minority community. It is not acceptable. So reducing that disproportionality is critical. As a city councilor, I've worked with my colleagues to create a civilian review board to do just that, to be working with our police department to get to the point where we get the data that's current and that's longitudinal, that shows us where the exact problems are with both our police force and with what's going on in our community. One of the main reasons that we have a disproportionate contact with our minority communities is because of the way we look at marijuana, the way we look at crimes that have to deal with drugs, drug addiction. So the first thing that I would love to propose is that we move forward with a legalization of marijuana. Over the last 5 years, I have seen at least 10 states in the United States go through the process of experimentation, understanding where the pitfalls are. That will be a major game changer. We get to the point where people that are not incarcerated any longer for simple possession. And those that have fallen victim to that law at this point in time, we need to commute their sentences once we determine that that is the reason why they're in prison. So I think it is a multiple facets to this issue, and you have to look at it holistically.
Thank you. Sally Hudson.
So the question was, what can the state do to help cities close racial disparities in our arrest rates? And I think one of the first steps is for our state to get better data. Virginia is really behind the times at centralizing data. So often in our cities and counties, our arrest data lives in silos. Our schools data lives in silos. So Richmond can't tell you about these disproportionate arrest rates that are being documented year after year after year in Charlottesville and compare Charlottesville to how it's performing around the country. Richmond can't tell you right now how many Black teachers and how many white teachers Charlottesville city schools have relative to other parts of the country. Virginia's really behind the times when it comes to documenting those disparities statewide and centralizing them into a statewide monitoring system. So the first step to solving the problem is documenting it, and that would be the first thing that I would encourage the state government to do to support local leaders. And then I think we also have to recognize that while there are specific laws that we can change, like putting us on a path to legalization of marijuana, which I would also support, some of it is just about the more direct racism. It's about the differential stop rates that come from a more deeply embedded racism on the part of officers. And so we need to be investing in training programs so that we can stop those kind of implicit bias problems. We also need to be investing in hiring more officers of color and in the programs that would allow them to make their home here in Charlottesville, like affordable housing and higher wages that make it more attractive for people to stay here and be part of the communities that they're policing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This next question will go to Sally Hudson first. Charlottesville has a history as one of the most highly racially and economically segregated cities in the Commonwealth. The effects of this segregation are not trivial. The Thomas Jefferson Health District's Map to Health report, for instance, has identified a significant disparity in life expectancy based on neighborhood. What can the state government do to address such inequality across the Commonwealth?
So that's not unusual for college towns. Charlottesville is like a lot of college towns across the country. We're often the most unequal communities because often the upper class folks are doctors and professors, and they have some of the most highly educated and supported children. And then those folks send their kids to private schools, and they tend to turn their attention away from the public schools, and we end up with deeply divided communities. So this is not a unique problem to Charlottesville here in Virginia. What the state government can do is provide the city of Charlottesville with more funding and flexibility to address our segregation problems. So more funding in the state housing trust fund so that we can build more apartments and other multifamily dwellings that make different parts of the city accessible to people of color. And then we can also offer the city more flexibility in the form of how we tailor our housing code to encourage developers to include affordable units. So things like inclusionary zoning. With the combination of funding and flexibility, we're giving our city more of the resources they need to address our affordable housing crisis. And that's an essential step in encouraging the kind of diverse mixed income communities that would help stem the time of segregation here in Charlottesville.
Thank you. Kathy Galvin.
Yes, a legacy of Jim Crow is certainly our segregated neighborhoods. They're segregated by class and race. And as a school board member, I saw what that did firsthand to the kinds of dynamics in our elementary schools and then later on into our middle and high school. That's why I really worked hard as a school board member to close achievement gaps by collapsing our tracking, by then making sure we had enrichment services for first generation of children going to college for the first time. And that's also why I was a proponent of early childhood education as part of our reconfiguration plan. Something that we are doing is in this past council fiscal cycle, we've just adopted the funding of moving forward with the reconfiguration plan. I also want to say that it's very important that we start looking at how do you do resident-driven redevelopment. And that's something that we worked on as a city, and it's something that I will work on as a state delegate. Because what needs to happen is that more of the residents have to be in the driver's seat as to how they want to redevelop their communities. And they are predominantly of color, but also make sure they're also able to be upwardly mobile with a variety of income levels. So I think at this point in time, the kind of program we need to open up opportunity is got to be multifaceted. And it's not just one size fits all. It's something that's going to take us through planning, through zoning. And at the state level, it is extremely important that we make sure that we give the local governments the tools they need, including progressive taxation. So they're not so relying on regressive taxes like meals and sales, and then actually the property tax.
Thank you. The next question goes to Kathy Galvin first. The death penalty is still legal in Virginia, which has executed the second highest number of people of any state since 1976. Do you support the death penalty? What policies regarding the death penalty would you support?
I do not support the death penalty in any way, shape, or form. There is no policy that I would agree to support that would indulge that very, very harmful, biased tool that we use to control our communities. That said, we need to be working towards criminal justice reform, not relying on that as somehow the ultimate threat that's changing people's behavior. People are put in a criminal situation, sometimes because of desperate situations, sometimes because of policing that hasn't been altogether above board. And right now, we've got to make sure that we are not doing the ultimate crime against our own citizens by pulling the plug and using the death penalty. So having said that, what can we do to work towards decriminalizing some of the things that have actually no bearing on someone's ability to be a productive citizen over time? I mentioned earlier the importance of making sure that we do not criminalize drug use. If people have an overuse of drugs, that is a mental health issue, that is a therapeutic issue. I was a proponent of the drug courts. I've been a proponent of the mental health courts, and that's something I'm extremely proud of that I was able to do as a city councilor. But moving forward, we've got to work very hard to get to the point where not only we're not using the death penalty, but then people that are serve their time become full citizens in this Commonwealth and we restore their voting rights.
Thank you. Sally Hudson.
I don't support the death penalty. The state should not be in the business of executing people. I don't support the death penalty in any way, shape, or form. The moral abhorrence of the death penalty is made all worse by the fact that the people on death row are disproportionately Black and brown men. So the folks that are waiting there in that system are just a symptom of our racially disparate policing policies. There's no evidence whatsoever that the death penalty acts as an effective deterrent against crime, so it should not be a tool in our criminal justice care.
Okay, thank you. Sally Hudson, you respond to the next question, which is an Earth Day question. Climate change is a huge issue for many in the district. Stretching from carbon emissions to pipeline construction, environmental topics are frequently discussed at the statewide level. What should Virginia do to address that?
We've got to confront our climate change crisis head on. We have to walk, not run, toward a clean energy future, and we need to leave yesterday, or really decades ago, because it's been brewing for all of our lifetimes. I think that means that we have to deploy every possible tool at our disposal, both formal legislative action and the kind of grassroots extra-governmental lobbying that puts pressure on the appropriate people to take that. So let me tackle that in two parts. What can people in government do? And then what can all of you do in tandem with folks who are serving in public office? We need to be passing legislation that makes it possible for us to invest in clean energy at the pace that climate change requires. We're a clean energy hub right here in Charlottesville. We have some of the most innovative solar and wind farms in the country. But right now they're held back by our electric monopoly, Dominion Power, which really runs the show in Richmond. They're the single largest donor to both parties, and they put the kibosh on a lot of legislation that would make it easier for clean power producers to have their way. But in addition to those regulatory things that we can do, we need to be continuing to put pressure on actors from outside the system. So for example, right now, Governor Northam could revoke the permits that are required, that authorize the pipelines that are tearing through the Blue Ridge Mountains right now. That's entirely within his rights. That's not something that legislators get to vote on, but it sure is something that legislators can call for. And I would like to invite Councilor Galvin to join me in calling on Governor Northam to revoke the permits for both pipelines right now.
Okay, Kathy Galvin.
And thank you. At this point in time, I will work on answering the question, and that question has to do with global climate change. I've been an active player in that space ever since I was in high school, and I was on the special program for environmental studies. It's also something that I've been near and dear to my heart as a city councilor. And it's what I've been working on in terms of our transportation sector, making sure that we do not become totally dependent on our fossil fuel-based car economy, moving us towards buses, bikes, and pedestrians. I actually am a casualty of today's bike accident. So having said that, I believe that we're getting close as a state to adopting the regional greenhouse gas initiative. We had just read that the Air Commission has voted almost unanimously, 2 did not, to have Virginia become the first southern state to be a part of this regional cap and trade program. We do that, we're going to start driving the standards down, and we're making a regional commitment to make sure we lower greenhouse gas emissions, because that is the fundamental problem with the health of our planet at this point in time. Transportation and electrical use are 2 key sectors that are hurting this economy, the economy of Virginia moving forward. Charlottesville is in a unique position to be a leader because we are a leader in wind and solar. It's already 10% of our energy budget. Adopting the RGGI, which I supported routinely year after year as a city councilor, will then get us to the point where it becomes the standard for the state.
Okay, Kathy Galvin, I'm going to give you the opportunity to speak for an additional 30 seconds, and if you choose, respond to Sally Hudson's invitation to you.
And this is about the pipeline.
You have 30 seconds to speak as you choose.
I think we have to just completely wean ourselves totally from fossil fuels. And that means no pipeline. I believe that slowly but surely the entire legislature is getting to that position. And I would hope that by the time I'm in the House of Delegates, that is something that's already old news. We have so many riches in this state with our wind and solar that we do not need to be dependent on natural gas that's piped in and then shipped out. We don't need it.
Thank you. And Kathy Galvin, you get the next question first.
Okay.
It's a related question. Do you pledge to reject campaign contributions from Dominion Energy and corporate PACs? Overall, what, if any, campaign finance reform would you support?
I will not take any contributions from Dominion Energy. Again, I saw firsthand the dominance of that monopoly simply when we were trying to underground our utility lines in our West Main Street streetscape improvement. That inability to do that cost us $10 million on top of a project. It was a third of the entire cost of doing a street to make it much more multimodal, safe for walking and biking, as well as taking the bus. So it's really important that I underscore, I am not in support of Dominion Energy. I will not take any donations. So in terms of moving us forward in an alternative energy economy, one of the things we have to do is, again, do things like become a party to the RGGI is what it's called. We do need to do things like robustly fund on an equal footing alternatives to the car. We need to get to the point where we have electric buses, and we are actually setting up the land patterns in this region to accommodate much more mass transit. We're not too far away from being able to get to the point where we could have a bus rapid transit line along 29. But the state's obsession with congestion reduction on the part of automobiles has made it so that when we submit our applications to be competitive in what they call the smart scale applications, we do not get as full credit for including bike, ped, and taking the bus.
Thank you. Sally Hudson.
So that's another pretty straightforward one. No campaign contributions from corporate PACs for me, especially none for Dominion. So let's talk about what we can be doing to re-regulate the way we do energy here in Virginia so that we can pursue the kind of aggressive climate change future that we need. In the last legislative session, a really strong leader named Delegate Mark Keene sponsored a bill called the Solar Freedom Bill, which had a number of provisions that would have made it possible for both households and localities to do more to supply clean energy here in Virginia. So right now in Virginia, we have a really stiff cap on what's called net metering, where you have solar panels on your house and you can put energy back onto the grid after you finish generating your own power. That bill would have lifted that cap on net metering. So if you're making more power than you need, you get to put it back onto the grid for your neighbors. It also would have empowered localities to say, put larger scale solar installations on the roofs of schools or on defunct landfills so that we can be taking advantage of all of that vacant real estate to be doing more power generation. That bill was dead on arrival in Richmond because it makes both localities and households direct competitors with our electric monopoly, Dominion. So for those of you who may not be as deeply steeped in this Dominion stuff, that's why it's so important and why we talk about it so much in Virginia politics, because they're getting in the way of really concrete things that we can be doing to pursue a better clean energy future. One thing we do need to know right now is that Virginia is not a leader in wind. We have no wind. We have no wind whatsoever. And North Carolina is kicking our tail on the solar front. They have 7 times as much as we do. So there's a lot that we can be doing at the state level to expand on both those fronts.
Thank you. Sally Hudson gets this question first. It's a question about the Dillon Rule. The Dillon Rule, which exists here in Virginia, limits the autonomy of individual localities, only allowing them to pass ordinances in areas the General Assembly has explicitly allowed them to. What is your stance on the Dillon Rule? Would you introduce or co-sponsor legislation to eliminate it?
Show of hands, who knows what the Dillon Rule is, so I know where to start. Okay, great, about half. The Dillon Rule is like the state analog of the Ninth Amendment to the Constitution. The federal Constitution says the power is not explicitly granted to the federal government belong to the states. The Dillon Rule here in Virginia says if the state government doesn't explicitly tell the local government that you can do it, then you can't. That's basically the spirit of it. So we're really deferential to state government here in Virginia. We tie the hands of localities all the time. And that's a problem for things like raising the minimum wage and affordable housing, flexibility and all that. So that's why we're talking about this. Yes, I would absolutely support putting us on a path toward what's called home rule, which is the alternative to the Dillon Rule, where localities get the freedom to do what they want absent a specific regulation from the state level. I felt that for a long time, but I'm not a lawyer, so I wanted to understand what that really looks like. So I went to Rich Schrager, who's a professor in the law school here and an expert in local government law, and said, hey, Rich, take me to school. What do we do about this? And like any good professor, he gave me his reading list and charted the path to home rule from here in Virginia, from where we are now. It's important to note that this is totally doable. Iowa is the originator of the Dillon Rule. I'm originally from Iowa, so I'm kind of a nerd about this piece. Dillon was an Iowan judge. And Iowa went on the path to home rule 50 years ago. And now here on the 50th anniversary of Dillon Rule repeal in Iowa, there are small towns all across the state holding literal parades to celebrate the end of the Dillon Rule because it made it possible for small towns and big cities to tailor policies to their needs. So it's totally doable, and Virginia should follow suit.
Thank you. Kathy Galvin, Dillon Rule.
The Dillon Rule is not something that's just peculiar to Virginia. It's something that happens in several states in the Union. In fact, I think the majority of states in the Union have some form of Dillon Rule. Virginia actually is one of the most stringent, where there's a really strong kind of attitude towards mother may I before you can do anything. And I think that we have a lot of latitude in terms of land use zoning, but with one critical difference. Charlottesville does not have the ability to do inclusionary zoning. So that is one thing that could be done in an incremental way, get others in our House of Delegates to partner with us in order to move forward to get to the point where we have the latitude to have inclusionary zoning, meaning you build affordable housing in your developments as a matter of course. So I think the big question is whether you do this kind of full frontal assault on the Dillon Rule, or do you go at it bit by bit, piece by piece? And I think it's really important to have both strategies in play because you never know who's going to be in the top party in the House of Delegates or in the Senate for that matter. And in this case, there's no guarantee that we're going to be in a situation there will be a majority of Democrats in the House of Delegates. And so have a two-pronged strategy where we're not a majority at this point in time. You got to find people who will partner with you to get the ball over the finish line. I think inclusionary zoning is a good example of what we can do to chip away at the Dillon Rule. The other one that I worked in, and I went front toe to toe, is give the local governments authority to decide what to do with their own parks, including how to move and when to move their statues.
Okay, thank you. Kathy Galvin, to you. It's day one, and you've just been sworn into office. What is the first specific piece of legislation you introduce?
There are three areas that I am very passionate about, and it's related to the two big issues that I look through as the lens of global climate change and then structural inequity. And there's many facets to the structural inequity piece, and that has housing, that has jobs, that has education. One of the first things I will do as a delegate is to put forward legislation to make pre-K education part of the public educational system. That is a fundamental game changer for anybody that has had any children and has had to raise children in a situation where you see all of your paycheck go to childcare. And then when you see what happens in the public educational system, when children don't have proper education from 0 to 5, as a working mother, I did see my paycheck go completely towards our child care expenses. As the PTO president of one of our Southside schools with a high percentage of poverty and a high percentage of minority communities members, it was a terrible dynamic to see that you couldn't get excellent child care simply because of your income level. So those are the things that I think we need to really think about moving forward as to what will make a huge difference to our community, both from an economic standpoint, an equity standpoint, and just as a value standpoint.
Thank you. Sally Hudson.
I would love to write a modern Voting Rights Act for Virginia, a comprehensive election reform overhaul, automatic registration, early voting, vote by mail, putting teeth in our anti-gerrymandering amendment, and as some of you may know, my pet project, which is ranked choice voting. I think these are the kinds of reforms that we need to build up the bones of democracy, which have become very weak both here in Virginia and nationwide. So much of what we want to tackle in Virginia is on the back burner right now because we don't really live in a democracy, right? We live in a place where so many are not able to exercise their right to vote, and our elections are nowhere near as competitive as they need to be in order for us to have representatives who are accountable to the voters. I think it's the kind of thing you have to package in one big bill, kind of like Democrats did in Congress when they flipped the House in this last section with their HR 1. If you put it in one big bill, you'd both take a lot of things off the wish list that have been waiting there for a while. Democrats have been introducing these bills piecemeal in Richmond. But we also send a really strong message to voters that when Democrats retake power in Richmond, that they are not going to do business as usual, that their very first act is going to be return power to the people. I think that's a really powerful political message that then buys you a lot of credibility to go to bat on some of those harder issues that have also been sitting on the back burner.
Thank you. Now we have the last question before we go to closing statements. Sally Hudson will answer this first. What is more important, doing what is right or doing what is pragmatic? She thinks it's a trick question.
I'm going to reject the premise of the question. You can do both. You can do both. And here's what I really mean. I'm not trying to be glib, but I think it's very important that we think about the legislators as a body, each with their own role to play. We don't all have the same function. And I want to talk about what I think the role of this seat is in the House of Delegates. This seat sits on top of one of the most innovative, energetic, engaged, and progressive communities in the Commonwealth. And this seat has a job to do. Our job is to stake out the full force of an agenda, because the practical reality is that in politics, you only get some of what you ask for. So by doing what is right, by staking out a strong agenda, we are doing what is practical. We are expanding people's sense of what's possible so that the people who are sitting on those more toss-up districts, those 50-50s that have less latitude to stick their neck out on behalf of others, they then have room to strike a compromise. So I think that the practical thing for the person who holds this seat to do is to do what is right so that folks who have less of that latitude can do what is practical, and in the end, we get out the outcome that is best for all of us, all things considered.
Thank you. Kathy Galvin.
I certainly don't see pragmatism and doing the right thing as mutually exclusive. In fact, when I first got on city council, I created my own kind of roadmap on how we would become a more equitable city. And that was what I used as my game plan for the last 5 years, 6 years, in order to know that I was moving us towards greater equity. And by that I mean, I knew that we were going to have about $100 million worth of investments in our infrastructure. So I made sure that I wrote resolutions that had embedded in them our own ability to hire our local residents through city government. Now, you can't do that as a bid situation. State procurement laws need to change. We need to be able to give local governments the authority to make a community benefit decision of hiring local. So other examples of looking at a big picture and then implementing it one step at a time is incredibly important in order to get people to buy into particular details. I have a very good friend that is as a delegate in Petersburg, and she had the same dynamics in her community with a person that was in an area south of Grundy. a Democrat and a Republican. She worked together, and we were both in the Sorensen Institute together for about 10 months in 2015. Together, they became partners in getting legislation passed to entice businesses to go to their low investment areas to increase the opportunity for jobs for their residents and get them out of poverty.
Okay, thank you. We now go to our closing statements. Each candidate has 2 minutes to make a closing statement. And again, by virtue of the coin toss, Kathy Galvin will go first.
And this is 2 minutes. Okay.
2.
Thank you. Sustainability is how we take care of the planet. Equity is how we take care of each other. What kind of people we become is a matter of experience and the values that are imparted to you by your family. So I've been on this trajectory ever since I was a kid in 2nd grade as a teacher's aide in the Head Start program that my mother founded. I've been on this trajectory to get us to the point where we are looking at the world both through equity as well as sustainability. I've done that as a PTO president when my 2 sons were small, and we saw what I saw firsthand when we chose to go to a school that was south of the tracks. I saw firsthand the disparities in class and race in this community. That's what often propelled me to get more local action. Like our PTOs couldn't even raise the same amount of money as the Northside schools. And when I was on the PTO council, I tried to get to the point where we were distributing all of our revenues equally to our schools. Didn't happen. That propelled me to get into the school board. And that's where I worked with my colleagues to close achievement gaps, increase graduation rates. I also focused on getting our reconfiguration plan. That brought me to the city council, where I'm so happy to say that this past budget, I was able to pass with my colleagues funding to do the redevelopment of our Friendship Court and also our public housing community. So moving forward as a delegate, I know that experience and know-how and the ability to get things done matter. I have experience in that. And the 3 areas that I'm focused on are in sustainability. We've got to get ourselves off of a fossil-based economy, move towards more transportation choice and more energy choice. We've got to get to be more equitable, and justice and safety is critically important. And that's why I was a proponent of gun safety throughout my tenure on council. And I will take that, as I had in front of the committees, I will take that to Richmond.
Okay, thank you very much. Sally Hudson.
Well, thank you again, all of you, for coming. And as much fun as this last hour has been, can you begin to think of all of what we haven't talked about? We haven't talked about the rising cost of college. We haven't talked about the future of work. We haven't talked about all sorts of things that we could have talked about. So I think me and my team are going to go hang out in the amphitheater after we're done. If y'all still have questions and want to talk more, it's a beautiful night and we should do that there. But in the time that I have now, let me leave you with one thought, which is that the stakes of this election are really, really high. And I know that a lot of people sometimes sleep on state government. This is what's called an off year primary in Virginia, which means it's an odd numbered year without the governor at the top of the ticket. And these are typically really low turnout races. But our community has a really important choice to make. Because right now, like I said, we stand at a really critical point in Virginia's history. Democrats are just 1 seat down in both the House and the Senate. That means Democrats are finally in striking distance of flipping the General Assembly. That Democrats might actually get to govern next year. And in that time, I think it matters what kind of Democrats we send to Richmond, what kind of Democrats we want to be. These are the Dems at UVA. Some of you may not consider yourself Democrats, but these are the people that have to be in place if we finally want to shake things up in Richmond and really fix the bones of our democracy itself. So I think in that time, this district has a responsibility to send someone to Richmond who is built to lead, to stake out an agenda that can pursue solutions on scale with the kinds of problems that we face, like a climate crisis, like mounting student debt, like the future of work. And so